Hi guys, so next up it's time to explore the future of medicine with Professor Colin Melville, who's the Medical Director and Director of Education and Standards at the General Medical Council. So Professor Melville is going to start with asking you all a question and it will be followed by a discussion, so it would be great if you could all participate in the chat function. And also, if you guys have any questions, please post them in the chat function as well, as Professor Melville doesn't have access to the Q&A. But I'll hand over to you now, Colin. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that introduction. And it's really weird. I'm using two screens and there's a slight delay on the broadcast screen. So I'm seeing back in time. But hey, that's just adds to the excitement, doesn't it? Hope you had a good lunch if you're in that time zone or wherever you are. And it's great to be here. I just thought I'd start off with just saying, so who am I? Because I think some people look at senior leaders in healthcare and think, well, they must have had a pretty easy ride. So here's a very potted summary. I was the first in my family to go to university. I got into medicine in the UK through clearing. I had pass-fail exams in 2 of the 3 year 1 subjects. So that was anatomy and physiology. But I did get through finals first time. Spent my clinical career in anaesthesia emergency medicine before becoming a consultant in intensive care. And alongside that, I've been involved in leadership in both postgraduate and undergraduate medical education for quite a long time, actually. I'm now the medical director and director of the UK medical regulator called the General Medical Council. But let me start with asking you a question, and I'd really be keen to hear your comments in the chat. What's a doctor? So I'm not here talking about, PhD, that's important. But in your mind, this is about healthcare. So what's a doctor? How would you define a doctor? So come on, let's have some answers in the chat and let's see where we get to. And we'll have a 3-second lag while I catch up with you or you catch up with me. But here we go. What's a doctor? Let's have some thoughts on what that is, because if we don't understand that, we can't work out where to go next. So I'm watching the chat. I'm hoping that there's some folk out there. Here we go. So, any thoughts? How would you define a doctor? So, being a bit asynchronous might make this more complicated than I had perhaps imagined, or maybe everyone's had lunch and has gone for a snooze, who knows. I'll give it a few minutes, a few seconds, but I might carry it forward, see if anyone's there. Okay. Well, if you catch up with me, that's fine. I'll carry on, but we'll try and monitor the chat anyway and see what's happened. Here we go. So Bethany's very helpfully said, someone who looks after others who are struggling physically or mentally. Yeah, great, that's good. Someone who uses science to improve mental and physical well-being of patients. Brilliant, brilliant thoughts. Anyone else? So, of course, if you were academically minded, of course, you'd have to look for the literature, wouldn't you? Well, I'm not looking at any literature today, but I did type this into Google, and here's what it comes up with. So I've highlighted in blue the bits that I think are really important. Is it people who treat people who are ill or hurt? Is it someone who specializes in the healing arts? Interesting phrase. But this bottom one is the one that I think is interesting, partly because it relates really closely to my role in working as a regulator, in our role as the professional regulator. Someone who's involved in promoting, maintaining, or restoring health. And I think we've got some of those comments in there. So that's really helpful. And I can see also, interestingly, another phrase which I'm really pleased to see. But let me ask you a supplementary question, if I may then. What do we mean by health? Because actually, that might be at the heart of a really important question for us. So there's another poser for you while you're typing in the chat. What do we mean by health? And I'll pick up some of the other comments. So doctors help physical and mental well-being by giving them treatment. That's from Charles. And Lewis says, someone who finds the root of health problems. That's an interesting perspective. I might touch on that a bit later on. person with responsibility in giving treatment service physically and mentally. So clearly there's something in here about physical and mental health, which is, I think, interesting. Okay, let me pose then, here's something that actually comes from the World Health Organization, and they describe health in this way: a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not just the absence of disease or infirmity. And if you think about the role of a doctor, sometimes I think what we think about is, well, it's to do with treating disease or getting rid of disease, but not necessarily about complete physical well-being or complete mental well-being. But the curious thing here is that WHO also refers to social well-being. I remember a few years ago seeing someone who'd published a paper in an academic journal saying, why can't a doctor prescribe a gas boiler? Now, notwithstanding the fact that we're now in a climate change world where we might challenge the choice of a gas boiler, the point here was that if you don't change the environment, and this was a family who lived in a very poor environment, if you don't change the environment, what's the point of keep treating the disease when actually the solution lies in changing the context in which they live? So there's some interesting challenges, but this is about the future of medicine, of course. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves, what do we know about the future? I don't know if you've thought about that, but if you're thinking about a career in healthcare or career in medicine, this is a really important question to ask, because otherwise you might be coming into a career that isn't the career that you imagined. All right, so here we go. Another question. I know it's after lunch, well, in the UK anyway, but I want to get you thinking. So what do you think are the likely health challenges in the next 20 to 30 years? Now, I've put up some global maps here of different issues that seem to be on the agenda, but I'm interested in your thoughts. What do you think are the likely health challenges in the next 20 to 30 years? Because actually, if we can think about that, then we can think about, and therefore, what is the role of the doctor in addressing some of those challenges? So, okay, back to the chat. I will also pick up some of the other comments. So it's good to see that we've got physical and mental health in there. I think that's really, really helpful, because up until probably relatively recently, mental health didn't get the priority it probably rightly deserves alongside physical health. So I think that's a really good observation from folk. What have we got? Okay, so in terms of demands, an aging population. Yep, really good. Okay, an ethical question from Ella saying, is genetic engineering going to be accepted within society? Okay, Theone, I hope I said that right. Sorry, about people's mobility, something about moving around. And Charles has talked about antibiotic immunity. Maybe, I don't know what you mean. Perhaps, Charles, it's about antibiotic resistance and immunity, but yeah, okay. Yes, okay, good global perspective from Ken on about, how we get consistent medical support in I think the language now, not so much developing countries, but I do understand that lower middle income countries is often the phrase we use now, isn't it? Okay, something around climate change. So that's important. There's a question then. So what are the medical or what are the healthcare implications of climate change beyond just heat exhaustion? I'm going to touch on that in a minute, so you'll see that. Population increases. So how do we provide healthcare? Really important. And George has come up with more infectious diseases. Do you know, this is amazing. And congratulations to you. You've really, really hooked into this. You're thinking in the right way. And I think sometimes it's very easy to think in the present and not to think in the future. We absolutely need to think in the future, don't we? So look, here's some points that I've picked up. This slide is from 2017. And it talks about a map of the world's emerging infectious disease hotspots, most of which were in East and Southeast Asia. Guess what? Coronavirus started in China. And back to the global warming point, that as climate changes, we may see diseases in the UK which are typically more associated with warmer climate. So infectious diseases, particularly something like malaria, for example. Chikungunya is going around the world, and Zika, you may recall from its appearance in Brazil, causing what we call microcephaly, small heads. That had started in Africa and had worked its way around the world. really almost unnoticed. So certainly that's a problem. Someone mentioned this. There was a good mention of the question of population changes. Not only is it increasing, but the demography is changing. This is actually figures from Scotland, so apologies to everybody else. But one thing I want to show you on the left and the right. So the left is from 2017 and the right is 2039. Life expectancy is increasing. So that means there will be more people who are older. Will those older people be well? Or will they have more healthcare problems? And actually, more likely, they will have multiple healthcare problems. So I don't know, individually or families or grandparents, etc. It's very common, isn't it, to have more than one healthcare problem and have multiple appointments with different clinics in hospitals. Not good for patients, might work for healthcare. But here's another curiosity. This is data again from Scotland. That little image on the left, just for comparison, is about how populations are distributed. And one of the things is that there's an urbanization, but particularly of young people. So on these, the solid is 27, the dotted outline is 2039. And what you actually see is older people living in rural areas. Why does that matter, you ask? Well, of course, it matters because most of our big hospitals, the centres that care and provide healthcare, are in big cities. So no criticism of Edinburgh, by the way, but having a big hospital in the heart of Edinburgh where most young people live who are likely to be well may not be meeting the needs of our future populations. And then some other really gets into some quite tricky areas about lifestyle and things like obesity. And I know there's emerging data now on the inheritance factors and genetic factors that affect obesity. But the problem is that obesity leads to a whole host of other healthcare problems, and these are important. Worth saying, by the way, that it has been suggested that by 2030, we will have a 20% shortfall in the healthcare workforce internationally. So if we don't think about changing the way we deliver healthcare and meeting healthcare needs, we may be facing a massive problem, which is not solved in the current trajectory. But here's some other interesting things. So this is data based on people who were judged to have died prematurely. And what are the factors that affect premature death? Now, let me just highlight two things on here. Your social circumstances, and that may have something to do with the whole health inequality, society inequality issues, and behavioral patterns. What your behaviors are makes up more than half of all premature deaths. Genetic predisposition a third, but look, even environmental exposure counts for 5%. So if we are thinking about the role of a doctor and we don't address those questions, then half of premature deaths currently, that will continue unabated. Now let's think about, what's happening out there that may make such a big difference to the future of healthcare. So medical robotics, one of the fastest growing markets on the planet. You don't need to read these. I'm just going to flick through them. They're just examples. Could we end up with a robotic NHS? What about nanobots and the possibility of deploying drugs through micro robots that go around your body? Is that too fanciful? Or what about this? So we've got a report here from 2016, so it shows you how old my slide is, but a robot operates inside the eye. Could we have imagined such a thing? And there is a clip on Google which you can find for yourself. That link, by the way, at the bottom doesn't work, which actually shows a fully robotic, automatically doing what's called a bowel anastomosis, joining bits of the gut together, not in a human, I have to say, but with no human intervention. So I think robots are going to be a big thing that come in. What about genomics? Well, we know about genomics, don't we? Because one of the things we've been able to see about coronavirus is all to do with understanding the gene sequence of this virus. But the possibility of gene editing and other things coming in could make a massive difference. So highly technical, almost futuristic. What about artificial intelligence? I think this is another area that we should not overlook. So Google DeepMind did a comparative study looking at 50 eye diseases and concluded in 2018 that it was as accurate as a doctor. So there may be a shift in the way that medicine itself is delivered simply because we can use other systems to help us in understanding healthcare. And this, of course, is very relevant at the moment because of the respiratory impact of coronavirus. This is actually an intensive care patient, but it actually talks about the fact that artificial intelligence could revolutionize medical care, could interpret radiographs, x-rays. Why not? They're all digital now. So I think we're going to see some big advances in that, which will shift the responsibilities and the role of doctors in the future. And hang on a minute, I know I'm quite old, but for any of you who are Star Trek fans, do you remember the tricorder? Well, it may not be as futuristic as you imagine. How about that? And then finally, let's think about personalized medicine. A lot of what we do, and now if we can understand the human genome, we are in a world that actually raises all sorts of thorny ethical issues, doesn't it, in terms of how do we provide treatments in the future? And do I want to know that in 30 years I'm going to suffer from a particular disease and what the implications are? But what if that could be treated or prevented? So I think we're going to see changes now in personalized medicine that does raise really important ethical issues. So these are the kind of things that we need to think about in the future of medicine. It's not as straightforward as the doctor this, the patient that. And finally, busy slide this, but let me just say, on the left is this idea of that I can summarize by saying, doctor knows best. I, as a doctor, see you as an individual patient. I treat your disease. If you like, I'm in charge. But actually what we need is a shift, which is actually about, if we can keep more people well, then we're going to be more able to provide healthcare for those that need it. And the big challenge for us is, how do we transfer that responsibility? How do we help our public, our patients, to take more responsibility for their own care? And therefore, what is the role of the doctor in that? Which is now not so much about doing stuff to patients, but actually helping them avoid the need to have stuff done to them. So I think these are really, really important challenges. And actually, if you think in that kind of context, the whole question of health inequalities and how we, it's a bad phrase really, but level up. How do we help communities that are where we know there are bigger health challenges, rather than simply going for those who are, if you like, intelligent enough to know how to seek for help? We need to reach those who are currently unreached. And we've seen that, of course, haven't we, with vaccination in coronavirus, big areas of population that have not been able to get together with the vaccine. So look, there's a whole load of resources here. I'm sure we can reproduce this slide or share this, not just about what I've talked about, but also about how to become a doctor, various information. You can see the second one up from the bottom is some specific information on how to become a doctor. And if you're really that minded, I think you can even find a few video clips of me talking about how to become a doctor and the things that go with that on YouTube, on the GMC's stream. So anyway, look, it's been great to share with you. If all I've done is just triggered some thinking, that's a good thing. And don't think that you've got to have certain A levels in order to get into medicine. Think about how you can contribute to the future and therefore be encouraged to look further. And don't be discouraged if you feel you're not the person that should apply to medicine. If I'd taken that view, I would have done botany at Aberystwyth, and who knows where I would be right now. So thanks very much for your attention. I've not looked at the chat recently, so I'll have a quick look at the chat. And I'm more than happy to take some questions. It's been a pleasure being able to speak with you. Thanks.